The BYU Cougars landed a 5-star quarterback. It's a massive recruiting win for BYU, but what does it mean for their rivals, the Utah Utes? That's what we're talking about on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. It's your first time tuning into this show. Make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. My name is JT Wistrcill, and on today's show, we're going to talk about the implications of BYU landing a 5-star quarterback, how that affects Utah, how this rivalry is changing a little bit based on some recent NIL trends for BYU and Utah. What does it mean? And we'll also just talk about at the end, like, why I still believe Utah can be the best football program in the state. But as I mentioned, we'll start out with just the headline. I mean, it's that BYU got a 5-star quarterback. It is a massive win for BYU. Max Chadwick, friend of the show of PFF, said it's BYU's first 5-star recruit since 2006, and it's only its third overall in the modern recruiting era. So it's a monster win. I mean, Ryder Lyons is the 5-star they landed, 6'2.5", 220 pounds, from California. A 5-star, the 13th ranked player in the nation, the number 4 quarterback, and the top player in the state of California, chose BYU over Oregon, Alabama, Arizona State, just to name a few. And yeah, once again, to put it lightly, he had Georgia, Ohio State. Like, he had all, when you are as good of a quarterback, and especially when you're the top player in California, right? Like, you're going to have every offer. And Lyons did. And he's going to go to BYU. He's going to serve as an LDS mission first for a year, and then he will go with BYU after that. So what does this mean for Utah? I mean, yeah, it sucks for Utah, right? It's not even as much about, at least how I view this right now. Like, I'm not looking at this like, oh my gosh, they got Ryder Lyons. He's a 5-star quarterback. BYU is just going to trounce Utah. As much as trolls and things of that nature would want you to believe that, that's not how it works. One guy can't change things that much. However, I do just think it's an unfortunate thing that's going on between Utah and BYU right now, and that's that BYU is just straight about recruiting Utah. If you were to combine BYU and Utah's 2026 recruiting class, the Cougars would have the top 3 players: Lyons, Brock Harris, Batumuli Talo. The last 2 I just mentioned from the state of Utah too. Obviously, Celeste Moa could still end up coming to Utah, and Utah has still added some quality players in this class. But BYU is also just straight up like they're kicking Utah's butt on the recruiting trail right now. Like, that's what this is stuff that's important. So we're going to talk about it on this show. I mean, BYU, because if this was reversed, we'd be talking about it nonstop and jumping for joy about it, right? Like, so it's part of the equation, right? BYU has the 31st ranked recruiting class in the country. They just landed a massive 5 stars. We said two 4 stars, 11 3-stars overall, 31st ranked team in the country. So where does Utah rank against BYU right now? Obviously, 2026 class isn't done, but, June is winding down. It's a big month, and it also becomes a question of, hey, how many commits are you going to add? Like, Utah's up to 11. I don't see them going a crazy high number. Like, I don't see this team adding 20 commits overall. And honestly, I mean, West Virginia's up to 22 commits. I don't see Utah doing that. And even in West Virginia, they have all 3 stars. It's 21 3-stars. I don't know if that's what you want. We're still waiting on Utah to hopefully land 1 4-star in this cycle. So I mentioned where BYU ranks. Where's Utah rank? They're not 10 back from BYU. I wish they were in the top 30 still, but they're not. They're not top 40. They're not top 50. Last I checked, Utah is 69th in the country in recruiting. Utah's gone more heavy on the transfer portal. That's absolutely true. Is it still concerning to be 69th? Absolutely. Where's that rank in the Big 12? Not top 5, not top 10, not top 50, actually barely top 15. They're 15th. Like, that's just not good. Surprisingly, Colorado's the only ones behind them. They only have 3, and we know how heavy into the portal that they love to go. So, yeah, I mean, Utah's just one of a handful of Big 12 teams, or actually it's a little more than a handful, but they're one of several Big 12 teams that unfortunately has yet to land a 4-star recruit. We've talked about on this show. I like the players that Utah has added. There are several quality 3-stars, including the one I just got from Timpview, Galea. I may be mispronouncing that. Like, I think he can be a really good player at Utah. But we also just said, like, the 3 players with the highest ceiling in this class all are BYU Cougars. And that's unfortunate, especially when they're from your own state. Like, I just wish Utah had some guys with a little more higher upside. Some of these players Utah's got in, they'll be fine. They'll be good. Utah can still absolutely beat BYU. But I just don't like that BYU is amassing more talent than Utah right now. Utah has beaten teams that have amassed plenty of talent in the past. They've beaten Oregon. They've beaten USC. But it doesn't make it easy. It's also, that was with Cam Rising. That was with a special group of players. And this Utah team does have to prove that they can get back to that. I think this group can, right? But like, we still have to see Devin Dampier not throw as many picks as he did last year. We have to see the interior of this offensive line play better. We have to see a wide receiver room that is full of unknowns and unproven individuals at the P4 level come together. We have to see a defensive line with a lot of new pieces replace some guys who've been there for a very long time. We have to see a couple new pieces in the secondary to fit, and even some guys like Alander Barton. He's got to bounce back. DeMooney, is he healthy from injury? Jonathan Hall, the other linebackers. He ready to be just take that next step as a linebacker. I thought he had good moments last year, but it wasn't a great fit there. So, yeah, as I mentioned, like, this is just unfortunate for Utah when you're looking at it and you're like, okay, Utah versus BYU, like, how are we doing recruiting wise? And frankly, BYU is kicking Utah's butt right now on the recruiting trail. I don't like saying that, but it's just the absolute fact of the situation when you look at the high level of recruits that they've landed. So how does this affect Utah versus BYU? Like I mentioned, it's definitely not a positive sign for Utah. And once again, going back to Ryder, like, my biggest concern is not like, oh my gosh, Ryder Lyons is going to be the greatest quarterback in college football and Utah will never beat BYU while they're there. I don't look at it like that. But I don't like that BYU is landing not just a 5-star, but a 5-star quarterback. That's not good. It's been a while since Utah, if ever, honestly, was in it for a 5-star QB. Obviously, Felix Ojo is a 5-star offensive lineman that Utah had him for a visit over the weekend. All the On3 guys are putting out that it's likely Texas or Ohio State. The visit went well for Utah. Steve Bartle reported it's an uphill battle still, so maybe Utah can still land a 5-star. Seems highly unlikely based on what's been put out there so far. But even at that, like, in a 5-star offensive line is a massive win, but a 5-star quarterback is an even bigger win. And I'm not just talking about the individual. Once again, I'm just saying, like, for the stratosphere of your program, like, what you're able to do. And BYU just proved that they can land a 5-star QB. That is something that I do think just is unfortunate for Utah and BYU's rivalry, that BYU's NIL gains on the basketball court have obviously been immense and have put them in a better spot than Utah is on the hardwood. And now football, some of the movements they've made, obviously some guys from Utah's roster even that are Cougars or were nearly Cougars based on some early and based on some tampering reports that came out earlier on in this cycle back in the spring. So yeah, it's just BYU's doing a really good job right now, unfortunately, and they've been able to raise the NIL funds, and Utah's got to figure out a way to compete. And I still think Utah is absolutely more than capable of beating BYU any year. But yeah, it sucks that our direct rival just landed a 5-star quarterback and their best recruit since 2006. Can't sugarcoat around that. But what does it continue to mean for this rivalry overall, the future of it? Also just, I mean, the state of the top football program, the top school in the state of Utah. That's what we're going to be talking about in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Rujit. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rujit Ready. Rujit Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rujit's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast. On average, in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, right, Rujit might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch, and now you can too. You can even read real customer reviews on their site. It's helping a lot of people feel more confident and present in the moment. Head to Rujit.com/LockedOnCollege, all caps, no spaces, and use that code LockedOnCollege, all caps, no spaces, to get 50% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnCollege. And use the promo code LockedOnCollege with the all caps, no spaces once again for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing reviews. Please visit the Rujit website for full safety information. You can head over and check out Rujit today. All right, continuing to talk about the rivalry that exists between Utah and BYU. It's one that's definitely changed in the NIL era, right? And BYU has been able to take advantage of the NIL era. They landed AJ Dembonsa, the top player in the class of 2025, is going to be at BYU next year. And Ryder Lyons in 2 years will be at BYU and very likely could be, or would actually be 3 years. Yep, that'd be 3 years because last year college, LDS mission, then BYU. So in 3 years, he could likely be BYU starting quarterback. It is very hard to start as a true freshman, though. I'd say right now I would give the odds to someone else to start. The other thing I'll just mention, though, like once again, going back to, I just think it's a bad sign that BYU has landed their best recruit since 2006. But when we're talking Lions, like there are 5-star quarterbacks who bust. Remember Tate Martell, Ohio State a couple years ago, busted there. UNLV, Miami, like couldn't really find his footing at any of them. Like it is very possible that Devin Dampier will be a better quarterback than Ryder Lyons has ever been. I don't know where the likeliness meter probably lands on all that. It's probably in favor of the 5-star in Lions, especially as Dampier still has things to prove at the P4 level. But we've seen 5-stars bust all the time. So just because BYU landed Lions does not mean that they have transformed themselves. But once again, I just go back to the fact that they got a 5-star guy does bode well for the future of that program. And now that the success recruiting wise we've seen on the hardwood is translating to the football field, that does have me nervous. I am not nervous about Utah being able to, Utah will never beat BYU. That's not what I'm concerned about at all. What does scare me is the fact that a lot of the Utah-BYU matchups, BYU could either be favored or just a top-ranked team, or just if it's more times than not an upset like that. It's a rivalry. Anything can happen, but I want obviously Utah to be a player that is a force to be reckoned with, not just because it's a rivalry, but it's like, oh my gosh, look at outside of the rivalry. I don't want it to become, Utah's good, but BYU's on another level and Utah can have a chance to upset them. I want BYU being the ones to try and upset Utah, right? I want Utah to be the one that's looking beyond this rivalry. I want Utah to be the one competing for Big 12 titles, college football playoff berths, all of that. And right now, with some of the NIL additions, BYU is putting themselves in a strong position to do that moving forward. Utah still has some strong additions and some strong pieces and can beat the Cougars. But obviously, the future battle right now is belonging to BYU when we look at the recruiting rankings and what they've shown in the NIL era. We've done several episodes on the NIL difference between the two programs, and that's concerning. Now, the House settlement, the CSC, this new commission, hopefully some of that stuff will regulate itself and even it out where, hey, you can only give this $20.5 million, like the NIL deals. Hopefully, if BYU is doing some things not the right way, that helps Utah even things out overall. That's the whole point the College Sports Commission is coming in with this thing, right? Is to try and level the playing field. So we'll see all that works too. But I do think the other thing I just take away from this because I was thinking about this because I saw Ryder Lyons committed, right? And then I see he didn't just commit, he did it on the Pat McAfee show. So when you think about ESPN, and sometimes can be a polarizing presence when brought up right now, obviously there's a lot of things said about their final coverage, but the two biggest faces in sports media right now are arguably Stephen A. Smith and Pat McAfee, and both the top two faces at ESPN, I would say right now too. The top two players that BYU has landed recruitment-wise, football and basketball, Dembonsa went on First Take, Stephen A. Smith, and then Lyons on the Pat McAfee show. That's massive exposure, and that's just good for the brand when everyone in the nation tunes in and sees where you go, that you are landing players that level, that their commitment garners the attention of First Take, which is one of the top morning sports shows, Pat McAfee's show, which is one of the largest, it's a YouTube and also just his normal show, right? Like that's a big deal. And that's another example of how BYU is becoming a bigger name, unfortunately, than Utah. I'm sure BYU fans would argue it always has been, but especially I'll even go to football and say like Utah had been obviously the bigger football brand, still has a chance to be, but last year BYU was the better football program. And because of how bad it was for Utah last year, BYU being top 20, I've said, like right now, if you were going to say who's the best program, you probably have to lean towards BYU because of what they were able to do last year and how bad it looks for Utah. Utah can take that crown back pretty quickly, but just based on how it all kind of went last year, that's where I land on it too. So for a while, it was Utah who had that crown because Utah had won back-to-back Pac-12 titles and things were great, but there was a lot of negative energy resonating off of Utah last year. I mean, heck, they missed a bowl game. Like that's an issue. That's a massive problem that this team had. And this is a Utah team that hopefully I expect them to get back to bowl eligibility. I think they got a chance to contend in the Big 12 this season, and we'll see what happens with this BYU team. I think there's a lot of things about them that lead me to think, okay, they're a regression candidate. We've talked a lot on this show about how you have the top teams in the Big 12 year in and year out. If you think the same 3 or the same 4 are going to be the same the next year, you're dead wrong. And that's just how this conference works. It's incredible. The parity is wide. And in the future, maybe BYU can shrink some of that parity, but the future isn't all there yet. I mentioned a lot of those guys they landed. Those are 26 guys. They are not going to be there to help this coming season. So I do think that's a big positive thing that Utah is going for them, is they can absolutely win though right now too. But I just don't like, as I said, like going even back to the thing, like if you combine the top 3 recruits from Utah and BYU would have the top 3. Like, I don't feel like it's been a while since we've said that. It wasn't that long ago that Utah was routinely out recruiting BYU, and that's just not the case anymore. So this is a Utah team that these guys, it just once again like makes recruiting and developing that much more important. Can you find the Devin Lloyds, the Brant Keithys, like which of these 3 stars are going to pop and burst? Like Teo Johnson is a name a couple years ago. He wasn't the high level recruit, right? But he's turned into a really good player. And Jordan Reed for ESPN in his way too early safety rankings had him as a top 5 safety. That's a huge credit to Teo and a huge credit to the Utah defensive staff, who at the time when Teo came in was a receiver. And then they were like, no, let's actually have you as a DB. Started out as a cornerback and then a safety, where he settled in quite nicely too. But Utah will continue to land elite talent at certain positions, right? Like Ike Garcia is buying his time as an offensive lineman for Utah. I think he's going to redshirt this year. Actually, I shouldn't say redshirt, excuse me, redshirt last year. So hopefully he'll play a little bit this year in certain games. And then next year, I would love it if he could slide into Caleb Lohman or Spencer Fano's spot, because I do expect both those guys to be gone. So offensive line is a place that I think we will continue to see strong presence for Utah. I'd add linebacker as another one. I'd love to see Utah land some more game-changing defensive end prospects. They always develop good players there, but I don't want this team to have to rely on getting home with Morgan Scalley's blitzes. I want them to win with guys winning up front. Jonah Ellis was able to do that. Connor O'Toole was able to do that when healthy. Hopefully this year, Logan Fano can be that guy, and this couple of the transfers really intrigue and excite me. We know Utah's going to have defensive tackles that can do their job. They always do. I expect them to continue to land pretty strong corner presence, whether through the draft or the transfer portal, because this is just not through the draft, recruiting or the transfer portal, because of this coaching you get Morgan Scalley, Sharif Shaw. But like receiver, Micah Simon, I like some of the guys he's brought in, and I thought Tobias Merriweather was a great guest, but he hasn't worked at Cal. He didn't work at Notre Dame. Can he put it all together here? Can he stay healthy? Because that's part of the equation too, right? I like Wayshawn Parker. I think with Utah's running, I do think that Coach Atuaya does a really good job. I think that with the offensive line play that Utah is going to continue to get, the running back recruiting should remain strong. And I also think that quarterback recruits should be pretty decent just because of Jason Beck's acumen. But can you land those next level guys? If not, you're just putting yourself in a tougher position. We saw quarterback development fail this team in the past. There's some other positions there where development could really harm them if it's not strong. And that's something we'll be monitoring too. I've tried not to be all down this episode. It's just the matter of the fact is BYU landed their best recruit since 2006. They're in the top, what was it, 31st in recruiting, and Utah is barely in the top 60. Like they're barely in the top 70. Like that's just concerning. So, but I do want to talk about too, like why I still think Utah is going to be able to beat BYU year in and year out a little moment, and especially just what the history tells us about this rivalry. We're going to talk about that in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. Was there a specific category like takeout subscriptions that added up more than you expected? How has everything in the app made it easier to manage your money day to day? Those are the questions you can answer with Monarch Money. Have you ever looked at your spending and been surprised by how fast it adds up? And do you ever wish you had all of your accounts and spending in one place? That's where Monarch Money comes in to help. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year today. As I said, a little down that BYU was able to land a 5-star, and Utah's had some of the recruiting struggles that they have. But I was reminded about something the other day, thanks to our friend at Front Porch Sports. If you aren't following Front Porch Sports yet, they're really they're a college football account where they just publish and post rankings constantly. It's really cool. They actually shouted out this podcast not too long ago, but they do a really good job just compiling these rankings. You're going to look at some of them and not like them. It's the nature of making lists these massive. It's something that I will also just say. I know how incredibly hard it is. I don't agree with everything, but I do think that they do a good job over there. So one thing they put over here was they did college football teams. And this is just a fact. This isn't even an opinion. College football teams with the most wins per state last 10 years. Any guesses who was number one? It's the podcast you're currently listening to, the team that I cover. The Utah Utes had the most wins of any teams in the state of Utah in the last 10 years. Utah from 2015 to 24, 81 games won, including obviously the Pac-12 championships, 10-win seasons too. So just a massive successful run for Utah. And BYU's up to 78 if you go to 2015 to 2024, but that was as an independent too. And let's not forget, we are just 2 years removed now from BYU. I don't think, did they make a bowl game? I don't think they did that first year. They were projected to get 4 wins last year. This is a Cougars team that they're starting to land those elite recruits for football, but that also will take some time to affect it. I do think this is a BYU team that is still absolutely vulnerable for the coming season as well, too. I think they should be celebrated for the success they had last year, if among BYU fans, but success one year doesn't guarantee anything from the next. We saw Utah prove their elite status at a time when Cam Rising won his first Pac-12 title and then won his second. Can BYU, a team that had a strong season but didn't even make the title game, can they put all the pieces all together again? I have major questions about if they'll be able to do that, right? And they've got some good players. Keanu Tanavasa is there as well, too. There's several pieces on that roster I like, but it's a Utah team that's got a lot of pieces I like, too. And Utah will have a much bigger chip on their shoulder from last season, being that they didn't make a bowl game. And this, we've talked about this before, right? But this feels like it's it for Kyle Whittingham. Did we say that last year? We were wrong. Yep. But Alex Markham of Utah Rivals came on the show before and said hey, that was the plan. Was it for to be Kyle's last year? And things got way off the rails and he didn't want to go out like that. I don't blame him for that. And I still think Kyle Whittingham brings a cachet, respect, and toughness to this team and this program that is going to elevate them to the next level. So really excited and intrigued to see what this Utah team can do this coming season. And I do think they're going to have a chance to go down to Provo and beat BYU. And obviously the last couple times they've played, BYU's beaten Utah in the last couple of matchups. But before that, what was it? Utah won 9 or 10 in a row. Utah year in and year out. Once again, the whole thing I'm trying to get through in this episode is it sucks. And I am concerned that BYU is landing better recruits and talent than Utah, especially the caliber of a 5-star quarterback, who's the best recruit that BYU's ever landed. And it would have been the best recruit, obviously, a Utah would have ever landed had they gotten him. But doesn't erase any given Saturday, doesn't erase the rivalry, and Utah still has some really strong components and some elite development that is going to aid them in the future too. So I am really excited to see what this Utah team can do this coming season. I think it's a team that is going to respond well and they're going to fight hard. It's also just a matter of the situation, though. You're going to play 9 conference games, and Utah's schedule ain't no cakewalk. I think Texas Tech's really good, as we talked about on my show yesterday, right, with Chris Level, who came on. I think Arizona State's going to be a tough out. I think Kansas State. I think Kansas is going to be. I think Baylor could be. We mentioned BYU. Utah misses all of the bottom 5 of the conference outside of Cincinnati. And they do not see anyone in the bottom 3. It's just from last season. That's how the cookie crumbled for Utah this season. I think West Virginia and Cincinnati are probably the easiest, and I say that with, I didn't use the quotations on visual, so easiest games, but I think West Virginia, that's a long way on the road, and that's a Mountaineers program that I do think Rich Rod is going to get them right, so that will not be a cakewalk either. It's a tough Big 12 schedule. Utah's a tough team. They're built the right way in the trenches. I trust the quarterback they have, and I do think this is a team that has the ability to go into Provo and beat BYU this year and any year, but Utah is just going to have to continue to find ways to gather more NIL resources, or just and also decide too in the revenue sharing, how much do you devote to football? I talked about on an episode before, I would genuinely give anywhere from $13 to $16 million to football if I was the one making that call, because football is the mothership that drives a college football athletic program. And it's also just you will go as high as your football team does. The reason we see a lot of teams get invited, like Utah got the invite to the Big 12 because they were good at football. Oregon State and Washington State, while they've had moments, they weren't able to reach those same heights. Therefore, they didn't get that invite, and it's unfortunate and it sucks, but you got to give credit for Utah for being able to get through and power through and just have some of the seasons and put things together the way that they have too. So I'm excited to see what this Utah team can do come 2025. And yeah, BYU's won some recruiting rankings, but in some ways too, like as much as I've talked about, it scares me for the future. The signs, winning one player, bring him in, that doesn't mean anything. He's got to live up to the hype. BYU does, and a Utah team that loves to be the underdog. We'll see if they can execute on being that underdog and have a monster year. That is going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes. From the market for a second listen, Locked On College Football, Locked On Big 12, any of our Locked On channels. Heck, we talked about BYU. Give Jake Hatch a listen too. He's the best. So head over there, head over to all those channels. Thank you again for listening to our show, and we'll be back with you tomorrow talking the latest in Utah football and Utah athletics.